Okay, y'all, so we're continuing where we left off. So we want to find the domain of this function. So remember, you're looking, does it have a denominator with a variable? Does it have a even root, like a square root or a fourth root with a variable? And this one actually has both. So I saved this one so that you could process what we did in class yesterday, and then now you can see a more complicated example where it's got two issues. So first of all, just because there's a variable in the denominator, you're worried with when is that 0, because the problem is when it's 0. So if we add the 16, or we set the denominator just at x squared minus 16, when is that 0? So set it equal to 0. So add your 16, take the square root of both sides, you get plus or minus 4. So this is telling me that I cannot have 4 in the denominator because that's going to cause us to divide by 0. Well, I also can't have anything negative, so I can't have a 4 or a negative 4, y'all, sorry. But I also can't have anything that's going to make that negative. So when I told you in class that you could use the little inequality symbols, that doesn't work when you have quadratic things, so you're going to have to actually think about it. And the best way to organize yourself is if you make a little number line, and we're going to have that number line set up where we're thinking about what happens on either side of negative 4 and 4 and in between them. So if you think about a number that falls between negative 4 and 4, so we could think about, like, say 0. Think about something that's bigger like a 6 and something that's smaller like a negative 6. So let's think about what's going to happen. I know that I can't be 4 or negative 4, but I need to know, should I be in between them? Should I be on the end? Should I be one way or the other? So we're going to come up here and think. If I plug in a negative 6, that's going to give me 36 minus 16, which is a positive. If I plug in a 0, I'm going to have 0 minus 16, so it's going to make me take the square root of a negative. So that's the no-nos. So we're okay if we're over here. We're not okay if we're in between because we're going to take the square root of a negative. And then if I'm bigger than 4, say something like 6, that's going to give me 36 minus 16, so that's the square root of a positive. So we're okay with the positives, we're not okay with the negatives. So what that means for us is that we're going to have to write down that our domain is the set of x's such that x is less than negative 4, because remember we can't be negative 4 because that makes us divide by 0, or x is greater than 4. Alright, or if you want to use interval notation, you would say negative infinity up to negative 4, but don't include it. Jump over and pick up at 4, not including 4, and go forever. Alright, so if you have more than one restriction, you've got to figure out all of them and then put them together. So in this case, I figured out what I can't have under the radical and what would make 0 in the denominator, and I had to not include either one of those. So I couldn't include 4 or negative 4, and then I had to stay bigger, because I'm squaring it, than 4 or negative 4, like bigger in the negative or bigger in the positive direction, to make it to where I had something bigger than 0 in the denominator. Alright, so the other thing that we need to talk about for this section is called a difference quotient. And again, this is not going to be on your test, but it's really just about evaluating functions. And it seems a little complicated. It's not really complicated, it's just kind of long. So the difference quotient is this problem right here. And it leads into limits and things that you'll do in calculus. And by the time you get to this point in calculus, this is going to seem easy. But right now it seems a little tedious. All right, so we have that as our difference quotient. And what problems are going to look like is it's going to say, here is my function. Find the difference quotient. Alright, that's an X, y'all. I got awful ugly over there, sorry. Alright, so we're going to take this. Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at something else, sorry. We're going to do this, but use this function. So for just this part, you remember that you are always able to, you couldn't see what I was doing. You're always able to pause and rewind because it's a video. All right, so I have this difference quotient, and we're going to use this function. All right, so I'm going to take this little piece. So for these x's, I'm going to plug in x plus h. So I have x plus h squared plus 4 times x plus h plus 7. All right, minus the actual function, so minus the function. And that's all over h. All right, I'm going to switch to a pencil in case I mess something up. I can erase. All right, so how about do x plus h squared? Remember, we're going to write that down twice. And distribute. So that would give me x squared, going to get x times h twice, so 2 of those. And then h times h, so h squared. Then we do 4 times x and 4 times h. Then we have our plus 7. Distribute this negative, so that's minus x squared minus 4x minus 7. And that's all over h. All right, so on top we're going to combine some like terms. So it looks to me like I have an x squared minus an x squared. So those cancel. I have a 2xh, and nothing else has an x and an h, so I'll write that down. I have an h squared, and nothing else has an h squared. I have a plus 4x and a minus 4x, so those cancel. I have a plus 4h, and then I have a plus 7 and a minus 7. So do you see how everything went away that didn't have an h? Well, that works out nice because you're dividing by h, which means if I factor an h out of that numerator, then I can divide off the h on the bottom. And ultimately, our difference quotient works out to be 2x plus h plus 4. All right, so go back and watch that again, or just pause it so that you can write it all down. Sorry, I forgot to scooch it up. All right, so all we did was they gave us this function, and they told us to find the difference quotient. So I did this piece, which is here, plugging in x plus h for the x's. And then I did this piece, which was just subtract the function all over h. So I did some math and cleaned all of this up and collected my like terms and factored out an h and divided it off. All right, so listen to that again if you need to. Understand that if you're not planning on taking calculus and that made no sense, don't worry about it. If you are planning on taking calculus, listen to it again because it's not as hard as it sounds the first time. You just got to process it. All right. Y'all let me know if you have questions.